All right, guys, on this podcast, we're going to be talking about the 5 things that hold most people back and the psychology behind those 5 things. And I have a guest expert today. Her name is Heather Brito, and she is going to be deep diving into all 5 of these topics. She's actually a financial therapist amongst a ton of other certifications. I'll let her do the honors of telling us what she's certified in. But Heather, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I don't like to go through all the letters. Basically, I got into the money part, the psychology of money. Once you treat trauma, I'm a trauma therapist at heart. Once you treat trauma, you treat all aspects of the person. I treat all 6 human potentials, and financial is always one of those. So as we go through it, you will realize that trauma, emotions always hook into money behavior.
And Heather, you're a big piece of the Budget Dog Academy. You see a lot of people come in here with a lot of the consistent things we're going to be talking about today. To start us off, the first one we're going to talk about today is the lack of financial literacy. So this is kind of a pretty big topic that I think both of us could, elaborate on a little bit. What do you see when it comes to the lack of financial literacy and the psychology more so from your angle of holding people back?
Yeah, so I find the minute that you say budget, I find that a lot of people first don't know how to budget. They don't have a budget. Maybe they don't think they make enough money to budget. Maybe they don't want to look at what they're doing. But I feel like some of the financial terms, we are not taught money language growing up, or at least I wasn't. It's not taught wholeheartedly. And so I find people get overwhelmed and they have misconceptions about what that means. So, for me and for some people I see in Budget Dog, when I heard the word budget, or some people hear that, they hear restriction. And, once you learn really what it is, actually a budget helps me get things that I want faster. But we're not taught that. So I think people's minds go to budget. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do that. I don't know what that means. When you go to investing, forget about it. Some people are totally, it feels like gambling to some. And then all of this hooks into deeper stuff, right? So when you say to people, okay, you're going to create a budget or your amortization rate, if people don't have the money language and money knowledge, it hooks into something deeper, the psychological part, right? And so what they're really hearing is, I am stupid. I get that a lot when I work with money people, and the fear of that. And I am bad. And so when they're looking at their budget, they are bad because they're mismanaging their money maybe, or they have the debt and it's overwhelming to look at. And all of these things we're going to talk tonight about kind of hold hands. So I feel like the deeper root is the unconscious. We talk about it all the time. 93% of behavior comes from that. And really, when you don't know financial literature, you're firing from the place of I am bad, I am stupid, I am not worthy to even maybe have it.
So that's interesting you say that, because I always feel like there's a disconnect between a person that comes in the beginning and then the beliefs that they have around money specifically. And so when I hear you say that, like, it seems so simple. It's like, why would I generate a thought or a belief that I am stupid because I don't understand something that I was never even taught? And I can tell you right now, I might be the money expert, but I'm not an expert at everything. And I guarantee if something else came up, a different topic, I'd probably be the first person to say, I have no idea. But I also know at the same time, I wouldn't shame myself or beat myself up about it. I'd say, who is the expert in that field that could help me? How do you think somebody could get over something like this, a belief that's firing almost subconsciously? They aren't even really in control of it necessarily unless they deep dive a little further.
Yeah, well, I mean, not to hone in on the program, but I think when you don't know something, or at least for me, if I don't know something and I want to learn a little more about it, or I feel dumb in it, I'm probably going to get a book. I'm going to join like a webinar. I'm going to do something like that to get a little more knowledge if it's something that I'm struggling with. So if budget and the terminology, if it's something I want to get my financial situation straight and I'm unsure, I'm going to start with that first. And then once you know, then you say, oh, okay, this budget thing, it doesn't really seem as hard. But when you're doing it, I tell people all the time, when you're doing this, you're going to be triggered. Your negative cognitions are going to be triggered because we're not wired to do the right thing with money. And we certainly didn't learn, most of us. So I always say you want to give yourself compassion and grace as you go through this. And now that you know better, you can do better, right? It's a choice.
Funny you say negative cognitions. I feel like most people have no idea what that is. Obviously, we've worked together for some time, so I know I can give you the breakdown on this, but maybe help somebody that's listening to this. What exactly is the negative cognition?
Yeah. So around age 5 or 6, believe it or not, some people call them self-limiting beliefs, but the negative cognition, at no fault of anyone, I always say people are doing the best they can. But around at age 5 or 6, we store its negative self-talk, right? We store our first negative cognition. Let's just say we were picked last, every gym class, we're picked last. So, I am not good enough, right? So that might get an I am not good enough negative cognition. So that stores at age 5 or 6. As we get older, we add to it every time we feel not good enough for XYZ, right? It's our own perspective. And then as we get older, we add more. Most adults have up to 8 of these core negative beliefs that dictate our behavior, and usually a top 2 or 3 that trigger. And so sometimes they're overlapping. When we talk about money, or trauma, let's say, let me do it either or, and we get the negative cognitions, they overlap. So although we're talking about the money, or although I'm talking about trauma, they show up in financial situations, relationships, work, whether you feel good enough to get the promotion, not get it overlaps the 6 human potentials, right? So if we believe 93% of our behavior comes from the unconscious, everyone's using the buzzwords, unconscious, subconscious, who's tapping into that? You have to be trained because it's all of our stuff we pushed over. We didn't want to feel the emotion. We didn't want to process it. We have life to deal with. And it's like the backpack we're carrying around, and it's going like this all day. It's buzzing and buzzing, but we're not tapping into it until we slow down and we're aware of it.
I feel guilty now because I used to pick people in the thinking back to my grade school days. I would be the quarterback on the team on the playground, and I had to pick the players on each team, and inevitably I had to pick somebody last. So maybe I caused the negative cognition. I'm not good enough for a few people out there. I'm looking back like Colin. I remember Colin and Jake, and I need to go reach out to them.
But I have the same thing, right? I was an athlete, and I'm like, they are not on my team. There's no way. So yeah,
Well, that's good.
again,
Good to know at least.
yeah, I mean, again, I always say, right, it's perspective. It's at no fault of anyone. Everyone is doing the best they can, but it's what someone perceives, right? So my son, let's say, could fall off his bike, and I'm there in 30 seconds instead of 10, and he perceives I'm unsafe because my mom wasn't here fast enough. It's his perception. It's not really, it's irrational sometimes, which is why when these negative cognitions fire, like you said, why would someone think that, they're dumb if they were never taught it? They're not always rational. Our brain isn't fully developed when we're storing half of them.
Are you saying Gavin's a diva?
He kind of is. He kind of is.
It's all right. Logan and Ellie are definitely on that track anyway. So that's really good. Lack of financial literacy. So number 2 is a big piece of the puzzle. And I know we've talked at length about this as well, is the emotional spending that happens. You have a story of your own with the Louis V bag, I think it was. What is about a
Bag, Brennan.
Gucci bag? It's the same thing, whatever. It's all one to me. What about emotional spending is crushing people and holding people back? And what's the psychological, trigger or whatever that it would be that is queuing that up?
Yeah, we are in a dopamine culture with not, I don't want to get too complicated into the brain, but we're in a dopamine culture. And when we're getting what we want, right? Or we're offsetting, I had a bad day today. I want to go buy the ice cream or whatever it is, right? When I eat the ice cream, when I buy the ice cream, when I buy the Gucci bag, I'm actually feeding the pleasure pot of my brain. So when you think about, we don't want to sit in stress, we don't want to sit in boredom. Most people don't want to sit in feeling sad, depressed, or anxious, right? But again, that goes into a deeper negative cognition. It all hooks back to something deeper. So if I'm sitting here and I'm like, you know what? I I don't really wanna I have conflicting values. I wanna go buy the Gucci bag. I don't wanna buy the Gucci bag. So right now I wanna save money. That's my value right now. That's my desire because desire is strong. So right now I want to save money. That's my desire. But I also feel like, I'm really sad. I had a rough week. I work hard. I made this money. I just got another stream of income. I deserve this Gucci bag. What's going to win out? The emotion or my desire? It depends which one is stronger, right? If I'm aware of my negative cognition, I'm most likely going to stay with my present goal. If I'm not, when I was growing up, right, I had the I'm not good enough negative cognition. I went to the bougie undergrad college. I saw these people, had the nice things. And so when I thought that I had made it, I wanted the Gucci bag because the Gucci bag meant that I was good enough and I wasn't a failure, irrational. But when I was in the I'm not good enough, I walked into that Gucci store. No way, shape, or form should I have been in that store. I had made it even a little bit, but I had a little bit of investments. I had some money in the bank, which I was not common. So I walked into that Gucci bag, and I will tell you what, Brendan, I walked into that store, I bought that bag, and I still remember the feeling in my body because I thought I'm not a failure and I am good enough. It was not rational. And then I remember talking to my guy. I didn't have a Brennan. I had some guy who I think felt pretty bad for me, and he was trying to help me out. I had friends who were wealthy, and they're like, "You're gonna meet with this guy," and I think they paid him, but they didn't tell me that. They're like, "No," and so he said, "Well, where's this money?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean, where's the money?" He's like, "You should have this much money left in your budget. Like, we need to be investing that." And I said, "Oh," I said, "I finally made it. I have money in the bank. I have investments. I bought a Gucci bag." And he said, "You did what?" He said, "You're going to return the Gucci bag. You're not even close to making it." And I said, "I'm not returning the Gucci bag." It's crazy. Remember the dopamine hit, right? The pleasure. But it's not only that. I offset it at least two negative cognitions. I am good enough and I am not a failure because I can buy the Gucci bag. Not rational and emotional response to really offsetting the negative cognitions.
Wow. So it's really it's almost like a chain of uh chemicals rushing through your body when you make those decisions. And that's a really powerful statement because I know a lot of people, I talk about a lot. It's like, obviously, they call me the budget dog, and I'm working with people to budget. So therefore, most people naturally will go to restriction, like you mentioned earlier, taking away, which is in fact nothing of what we do here. But when somebody comes to me and they have a car and it's $60,000 Audi and they're making $50,000 a year, I'm going to call something like that out. And I think a lot of that stems from exactly what you just said, opposed to just a silly decision. I feel like it doesn't all. Yeah. Most people know they can't afford that and they swipe a credit card anyway. Most people know they can't get the car, but they do it anyway. Most people know they can't get that house, but they do it anyway. And you're saying, honestly, it's just a chemical reaction that's pushing that individual into that direction to take that action. And then they almost probably feel a little bit guilty after the fact. And they live in this like cycle of like, I need it. There's a desire there, but then I feel guilty and I go back. How can somebody overcome something like that? Because when you come from nothing, like you mentioned, and all of a sudden you get something, you're now not a failure. You're a winner. You see it a lot of times all over the place. What can you do to like become aware of that and stop it?
So once somebody knows their negative cognition, or some people call them the self-limiting belief, once they have that information, I mean, ideally you'd like to clear that out, but that's not realistic for everybody. So what you do is you write down, if you have the I'm not good enough, the I am stupid, whatever it is, you want to write down a strong positive fact. A fact is a fact. We shouldn't really argue with a fact, right? So if you write down the strong positive fact, when you recognize you're triggered, I go into my budget dog account. I see the money I spent on Starbucks when I first started. I am triggered and I am bad with money. I'm bad and I'm stupid because I don't know what half these words mean. Those two things both fire. If I become aware of that, you go at it with a strong positive fact. I'm not dumb because I'm getting my budget right and I have joined this program. And I am not bad because I didn't know what I didn't know before. And now I'm getting on the right track. If it's a strong positive fact, you usually can't argue with it, right? That will shift you out of the part of the brain that holds the negative cognition. So the negative cognition is in the memory network in the brain. And then when we're triggered in it, we're in every time we ever felt that way. So imagine sitting in that. You want to at least go at it with a strong positive fact to pull yourself out. Then you can get the conscious behavioral choice that you want, not the unconscious. We're working on an unconscious default pattern when we're doing what we're doing, right? So when I was buying the Gucci bag, it was just the I am not good enough negative cognition. It makes me feel terrible inside. I buy the bag, I offset the negative cognition, I feel good. And that's all unconscious. When I'm doing that, I really think that I'm at a place where I have made it, right? No, I don't know any different, right? And until my guy, gets mad at me, but I don't know any different. I'm operating on an unconscious default cycle. That's what we do. It's what we're all doing when we're walking around unaware. And listen, I say all the time, sometimes it's good to keep your head in the sand. I don't know. Sometimes I wish I kept mine in it, but once you take it out, you can't really put it back in. So once you become aware, it's exhausting. It can be exhausting to say, okay, like, what am I in and why do I do this? And sometimes it's late. I mean, I met with a woman the other day, and she was very successful, but got a divorce. And then I think you have something to prove, kind of, right? Or a lot of people think they have something to prove. She makes a good income, but she has a home over $1 million and she's driving a fancy car. And listen, I tell people all the time, you want a fast, fancy car. I don't value that, but if you do, let's figure out how to get it. Let's make your system, or I think you call it your structure, work to get you that, right? So, but she realized when I was doing it, and she was like, this is why I've done this.
Mhm.
I've done this because I didn't feel good enough. And I've done this because I just offset my I'm a failure. I felt like a failure because I got divorced, but because this house and this car status. So you have to remember, some people have a money status, right? So if you look at money scripts is a money status thing, and we put our status or our worth with money, and that's a tough thing too. They hook into the negative cognitions, and if we think that we're successful or we're worth something because our house is bigger, we have the fat fancy car, right? Again, not rational, but this is what society promotes if you think about it. Um, when you see the the nice house, that's what you want. What most people want. Wow, look at that nice car. Look, but we don't know what's behind the nice car in the house, right? And sometimes that's what I learned. It's the negative cognitions, and they're really not in a good financial place to have it.
You know what's sickening about that is marketers know exactly what you're saying, and they know that psychological makeup of a human being, so they target exactly that. And
Yeah, exactly.
I always used to get so upset online, like, when I got into social media, like I was not the person that would flash a Lamborghini or a rich house or, huge house or whatever, but you'd see a lot and you would still see people being victimized by those people. And it's like, guys, this is such an obvious, like, just scam or whatever you call it. And I saw it time and time again. And then instead of getting frustrated, I tried to understand the psychology behind it. I was like, it's really just what people are going to fall victim to forever until they become aware. And like, it's just like a default program, in fact, in our mind that puts us in that spot to be victimized,
Yeah. It's true. And then when you work with trauma, I mean, I had a client, history complex trauma, and she was like, I'm going to get a Tesla. And I was like, I'm not being mean here, but let's talk about your negative cognitions, your trauma, and the money that you bring in a month. More than half of your paycheck is going to a car. Do you really want to do that? She did it, but it offset. I mean, she has a husband too. But the other thing is when you see husband and wife and they don't share money, and this will go back into the financial literacy, right? And then the emotions of it, and they don't have their money combined and they have a joint account, but they're putting some money in the joint account. And then they're doing whatever they want with the other money. And sometimes it's like, oh, I don't want the other person to see that I spend $200 on. There's so much money to be found there, but people's how they're wired, their trauma, their negative cognitions, they don't combine it,
It's
which
so
I find
powerful,
wild.
for what you do for people because, like, I'm hearing this and I'm, like, thinking, I'm like, I'm just the logical, like, I'm aware that this is a massive problem, but from my expertise is the logical side of things, and
Yeah.
I am so aware, though, at the same time that the behavioral aspect of personal finance is usually what's the downfall of almost anybody. So, like, listening to this podcast alone or listening to you on a regular basis would probably be better for the average individual than listening to me, to be honest. And so, like, even if I am the financial expert, it does not matter because that's really not driving your decisions. Like there's a little bit of like the first part we talked about is lack of financial literacy. I can get you there, but I can't change your behaviors, which is why you're a huge part of the program because I know I mean, every student that comes in is like raving. Like, I think I typed in your name one time at the top. I think you popped up like 212 times. Like, that's how much people love you because you're changing people's lives every single day with this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the aha moments until we have them. And we definitely don't walk around saying, oh, yeah, there's my I'm not good enough or my I'm a failure until we actually know that we have them. I mean, I remember my lady saying, oh, you have the I'm a failure. And I'm like, no, I definitely don't have that one. I'm an overachiever, been number one, two, maybe three in anything I've ever done. And she was like, okay. And then I remember 6 months later, not rational, I wanted to buy something and I couldn't buy it. I was on my competing values, right? I want this now, but I have this goal. And so I didn't buy it, but I had the I'm a failure because I just couldn't buy that. And if I wasn't a failure, I would have been able to get it. People are doing that all day long and they don't know it,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're just offsetting the negative cognition all day long. I mean, it not just money, right? All day long, and they don't even realize they're doing it.
Which gets us into point number 3 of self-control issues, because that really probably stems a lot of from what we're talking about. So that, along with like the instant gratification and needing it now and the fear of missing out and all that kind of stuff, how does that tie into what we were just talking about?
Yeah. I mean, think about impulsiveness, right? And think about if you're in a negative cognition and you're somewhere and there's something you want, you're buying it 100% until you realize what's happening and you work to change it, which is hard work. Like I said, it can be exhausting figuring out what's firing. And then the next thing is you have to be really honest with yourself. I mean, I literally always said I should have been a lawyer when I had to decide if I wanted it. And even sometimes now, listen, I've done this a long time. If I'm being honest, right, you have to write down if I want it or if I needed it, right? And if I said I wanted it when I had to cut out things, I had to say, what value would it bring to me, my family, and my business? And then I had to sit with it for 72 hours before I could buy it. If I just wanted it, I couldn't get it at that time when I cut it out. But that was because I had desired my why was big enough to make me not do that, right? But you want to look at that. If you're in a negative cognition, you're going to get it more often than not. The impulsiveness is going to win because you're offsetting something deeper. You have to put skills in place, like I just said. Do I want it or do I need it? And if you need it, you need to really write down why you need it. I could have wrote a case pretty much for why I needed anything and almost convinced anyone. I need this because XYZ. I could have had a presentation for it, right? You want to watch that. And then I would wait 72 hours to even buy it if I needed it for my business or something. But
What,
people are not doing that. You go on social media, what are you seeing? I'm seeing the nice shoe. I'm seeing the woman who looked stunning. They have their hair done, their nails done, they're getting the work done, right? And I don't, hey, listen, I'm like, you do whatever makes you happy. I'm not going to judge you because I look and I'm like, oh, that, I want that, right? I want to look like that. I want the car. I want the shoes. I want what I see because it looks happy,
mm-hmm.
successful,
And
right? I mean, that's what we're doing. That's what we're up against, if we're being honest.
yep.
But people don't know when you work with people on a deeper level. Even when people appear successful, or even if they are successful, I tell people all the time, doesn't matter if I work with people $100,000 in debt or more, or the millionaire, the negative cognitions show up in some way, right? Some form. It just looks different for everyone. And I always joke with people. I'm like, Brennan, he's so inspirational and motivational. He looks like he had so much fun paying off his debt. I know that not to be true, but you're logical and you had a plan and a big why. And it's not going to be fun. For me, it was like watching paint dry. And I never thought I was going to get there. And I mean, my student loan interest a month, I think, was like $850. It felt like I was never going to get out. So that emotional spending in the right now, I would say, oh, I can buy this right now because my student loan is going to be there till the day I die. I used to say that actually because I did. So those in the moment, the FOMO, well, I'm going to go on this vacation for $5,000 because my student loan, the $50,000 I have left is going to be there for a little while. So justification. But a lot of
Justification
people do that.
is crazy. Um, we're very smart beings, and we can justify a lot, and we are really good at connecting the dots. and making a story in our head up that makes a lot of sense, taking that action and then explaining yourself away after the fact and justifying everything that just happened. And deep down in your core, probably not the best decision. Um, but that's a really good point right there because we're smart. We're very smart, and
Yeah.
we have to almost beat. It's a game against yourself. I always think like my team's always asked me, and people have always asked me, who's your biggest competition? And like, I don't want to be corny or like sound like a guru, but I really don't like. I don't look at anybody in my financial space, like the Ramses of the world, as like competition. Like they're doing their thing.
Yeah.
I'm doing my thing. There's 7 billion people in the world. My goal is to help a lot of people. My style is going to connect to some. It's not going to connect to everybody. And like, that's all I care. I want to beat
Yeah.
myself, like be better than myself every single day. But I don't think a lot of people actually understand that because they're constantly looking at what everybody else has. You know what I mean? Uh, and number 4 is psychological barriers. So being able to overcome those psychological barriers, kind of deep dive into what those are and how do you overcome those things.
So basically, back again to the deepest root. Deepest root is the negative cognition, the I am statements. So there's a lot of embarrassment and shame, right? When you start to look at, or if you start to look at, okay, I want to get my financial life right. And then you look at, okay, we're spending $500 out to eat, a month. We're spending $200 on Amazon. That takes a lot of courage to look at what you're doing. And it's going to trigger those negative cognitions. It's not a fun space to be in at once, but the shame is really in anything. I feel like what keeps people stuck. And the shame is the I am statement. The I am and whatever you follow it with, if it's negative, that's the shame. And shame anywhere you look is what keeps people from really getting it. The embarrassment, the shame. First you have to admit that there's an issue going on, right? That's really hard to say. It's easier to keep your head in the sand and be like, we make good money. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing. We have a little debt over here and we can get out. That's easier than saying, we make over 250 grand a year. Why do we only have this much in investments or savings? What are we doing with our money? And to really look at where it's going. It's going to be embarrassing. It's going to be shameful a little bit sometimes, but until you do that, but then you're taking your power back.
You just nailed it.
Because then your why, then your strong why is going to win once you're able to just get past that part of it.
Henry's high earners, not rich yet. If I'm trying to think of high earners, high earners, not rich yet. Those are the people that are making good money. And like you just explained, is they're really not maximizing their potential. They got good money. They've always kind of gotten away with it, but they're kind of burying their head in the sand. Ignorance is bliss. All these kind of things that people say.
Yeah.
How does somebody is this just the law of averages? Most people are going to be average. Most people are going to stay in that little, average bucket. Or does somebody that is that Henry, high earner, not rich yet, have the ability to shift their, let's call it systems or chemical makeup of themselves to change the entire outcome of the future?
Yeah. No, listen, I mean, I see in Budget Dog all the time. I think I wouldn't be in this field. I believe truly and wholeheartedly people have the ability to change anything. Number one, if they want to change it. Number two, about getting the insight and awareness into how they're wired with no shame and no blame. You have to understand how you're wired. And then the next thing, you can have all the insight and awareness in the world. I mean, sometimes I talk to people, I'm like, you have all the insight and awareness in the world. It's the moving it into action sometimes that people get stuck. And that's when we go to the next thing. Why people don't move into action sometimes is really, if I move into action, if I put all this stuff down and I try to do this budget thing, what if I fail? Now I've tried everything and I'm still a failure. I'm putting that next notch in my I'm a failure. I've tried this. Look, I did it. I'm still a failure because I can't stop the spending or I can't get in control here. Or the other way, fear of success, right? You may not feel worthy or good enough to have money and I mean, I had that, right? So you can block. I used to think, I mean, I think I've said this to you, the poor get poorer, the rich get richer. People with money is selfish, a-holes, really is what. So if you don't remove that, you're going to block the success, right? And you have to look at your thoughts around that and how that impacts your emotions and then impacts your behavior. Obviously, I don't want to be a selfish, right? So then you limit yourself.
Say that
So it
again.
all holds man.
You said the selfish a-holes, like kind of elaborate on that statement a little bit for people listening.
Yeah, so I mean, when I was growing up, we had enough, but not a lot. I went to a bougie school, and I just found that.
I don't even know what bougie means still in today's world. Is it like I wanna be? Is it wanna be rich?
Well, in my college, I think people actually had some money, right? I think, I think a lot of them had like some wealth, if I'm being honest, like the parents, like the house. I mean, again, do I know? No, maybe they have a ton of debt. I actually don't know. But to me, the houses, the cars, like jacuzzis, you name it, right? So this is, it was an expensive school. I just happened to get lucky that I was good at a sport, right? And so you could kind of tell the athletes who are just good at a sport, and maybe a little smart. But yeah, I mean, the bougie and all of that, I don't even know where I was going with that because it's what
I distracted you there a little bit. So, you said coming up, you kind of thought all rich people were kind of a-holes and things of that nature, but like that's obviously not true, right? I think we can all agree that not every rich person's an a-hole. Some sure are, probably, but some poor
right,
people
yeah,
are too.
yeah. And I also heard not just that, but that they were cheap. But this is again, so we could go back to bullet point number 1. That's where I'm going to go with this, where financial literacy. People with these mindsets actually don't have financial literacy. I truly believe that. And once I found, you're a millionaire. Once I found that I worked with wealthier people, I was actually, oh, wow. It wasn't that they're selfish. It wasn't that they were cheap. It was that they had a discipline, they had goals, and they knew what they wanted, and they weren't frivolous with their stuff. It's a different mindset, and it's different level of goals. And that doesn't make you selfish or cheap, right? And you have knowledge in a place where some people didn't have knowledge. So if I looked back, it was really back to bullet point 1. When people don't have the awareness, this is where they go back to.
Yeah, I think even in my family, I don't come from a, let's say, wealthy family, very middle class, very normal family. And you get the comments at the Thanksgiving dinner. They know you're online sharing your financial knowledge. It's about all they know. And people always would say little comments like, "Oh, can you spend money on that? Can you do this? Are you going to go on the vacation?" It's just like a lack of understanding. Like it's a lack of understanding of the bigger mission and who I am as a person. And, I'm very disciplined. I'm very intentional. I like to use the word intentional because it's not that I won't spend money. Like I'll freely, like, it's kind of scary actually. If I see ROI, I don't really care about the dollar amount. Like if I see a legitimate ROI on an, mentorship or education or investment of some sort, I'll fling the dollars. I don't care if it's 6 figures. I don't care if it's 10,000. I don't care if it's $4.
Yeah.
But if I go to like this store and I see like something I might kind of want but not really need, and it's kind of like just more clutter, I'm gonna probably decline that. Or like literally, if I go to like Chipotle, I always joke about like I don't like guac, so I pass on the guac, and then I'll get like comments from like people that go with me. Oh, you can't get the guac. I'm like, dude, I don't like guac. It has nothing to do with the upcharge.
Well, you bring up a really good point. So what I always say to people can get really judgy about what people spend money on. And people are judging you because you don't want the guacamole, right? But at the end of the day,
Sucks. It's in the ranking.
if you think about it, we put our money with what we value. So when you look at more disciplined people, you said the word intentional, but I also think you're aligned with your values. And I'm not being mean or fresh here, but I see people don't know what they value. So if I'm not walking around and I don't know what I value or I don't have a strong why, and I'm in one of my negative cognitions and I see something like if I'm iffy in between, if I'm in my I'm not good enough or I'm buying it because I want the dopamine hit. I'm going to light that pleasure principle right up and nothing's going to feel better, right? But it's the value system. People don't know their values. Ask people what they value. Ask them their top 10, narrow it down to the top 5, and then the top 3. And then ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, each of their values, how well they're living it. A lot of people do not know this, but I find that wealthy people are disciplined and they know what they value and they're intentional and they put their money with what they value. People are not doing that. When you don't know what you value, you're putting your money everywhere And if the negative cognitions are firing, forget about it. Or if you have money status and you put your money with your worth, well, you're done. You're set up for failure until you can undo that.
Funny you say that. I posted on Instagram actually literally yesterday on my story, and I said money priorities for me. I listed them 1 through 5. Number
See,
was
I didn't know that.
obviously Logan's health with all the Dravet syndrome stuff. Number 2, the wellness of both of my girls and wife. So I didn't want to leave Ellie and Logan, or Ellie and Aaron out. They got to be included. Number 3 is family financial freedom goal. So just being able to be financially free, doing what we want to do. Number 4 is $1 million Dravet donation goal. And number 5 is giving back to others, students in particular. So
Yeah.
a lot of people might see like the decisions I make from a financial and like, why don't you have like a really, really fancy car? Like if you can afford it. I'm like, because I just don't value it. Like there's nothing wrong with a fancy car. But like when push comes to shove and we have a fixed amount of resources right here in our bank account, we got to choose which one we want. Eventually down the road, we can get everything we want, but that takes time. And so right now, I think what is more valuable to me? First of all, putting my daughter in the best position ever, or getting a really fancy car and putting that in jeopardy. It's like, it's a no-brainer for me. And so people will see the car and it's all sickening because it's a $45,000 vehicle, a VW Atlas. It's not cheap. It's a very expensive car, but it's not a $70,000, $80,000 SUV. And so people are like, well, if you can afford it, why won't you? I'm like, because I have other priorities and it's intense. And I would not, I could not sleep with myself if I gave the money to the car and then my daughter's at question or her health's at question or family's at question for something. It's like, I'm the sole provider here. I can't live like that.
Right. Well, you just said your value, right? You just listed a lot of people won't be able to do that. We put our money with what we value. And for some of us, the fast, fancy car again. And honestly, a lot of the time, if I were to work with, unless they're multimillionaires and they have that in if I talk to people about the other day about their Mercedes Benz, right? Why do you really have the car? I'm going to break this down. It comes back to the negative cognition. Do you really value the car? No, you don't value the car. The car's going to, you could have that car, you could have whatever other car's going to get you to work and back, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just offset the negative cognition. That's all that car did. And if you break it down, most people, if I worked with them, the big house, the car, it just adds more stress because of the payment, but they were in a negative cognition or they have the status thing, irrational.
Mm-hmm.
It's not rational usually, right? And so they're just offsetting something that's buried a little bit deeper, really. So when you know your values, you're clear.
I'm a minimalist at heart, so I just don't like a lot of stuff because, like you just mentioned, you have more risk with that. Like if I have an $80,000 car, if it gets dinged, it's going to feel a lot worse than if a Toyota got dinged. It's a quarter of the price. Like I actually value not having expensive stuff for that particular reason on a practical basis. And it's just always been who I am. And like I always joke with Aaron, I'm like, if I could live in like a tiny home and like obviously we have kids and stuff like that at this point, but I'd be fine with that. Like I don't need a big house. Like the house we live in isn't huge and I thoroughly enjoy it. And then my parents are always like, you will have more kids. You have to move up. I'm like, I think we're good. Like I don't need anything else. So this is great conversation, Heather. Our 5th thing that's holding people back in a major, major way is the cognitive biases, fear of failure and fear of success. And we've kind of hinted at this along the conversation so far. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So if you have, again, I'm going to go back to, people like to talk about niches, but the unconscious really dictates everything from my whole career and what I can see. If you go back to the negative cognitions, the root of the person, as you grow up, you hear things, right? You make your own assumptions about money. You see things happen, but you also, and for fear of success and fear of failure, sometimes people think it's easier not to have it than to have it all and lose it. So I have multimillionaire friends. I love them. You would never know it. Down to earth. The wife has like anxiety, a lot of anxiety about we can only go down from here. Like how can we keep going up and up? There is a real fear, right, of failure. So once you get to a certain level, when is enough, right? So I think for some people, it's a fear of having it all and then losing it. So the fear of failure. And then for other people, the fear of success and actually maintaining the wealth and doing the right thing, which they both kind of hook in if you really think about it. They're really not separate. They kind of both hold hands for some people. And so a lot of people don't think about that either. Some people don't even think they'd ever get to the point where they have to manage money, right? Mm-hmm. But when you set yourself up and you set a system up, you actually see, oh, wow, my money can actually make money. And then when you make it work for you, but it can bring anxiety on. It can bring anxiety on about, am I going to lose this? What would it look like if I lose this? If I get comfortable having this, right? And, or how do I manage this? So they go together. It's wild.
This is so powerful because so I'm very open about like, things I'm open about everything. Right. So one thing I talked to Heather about recently, guys, is exactly this. So by 30 years old, essentially, we became millionaires. We did a lot of cool stuff and it was awesome. But at the same time, it's all of a sudden in your mind, what if I lose this? So I reached out to Heather about this and she's like, you're fearing success in some sort of way because it's not necessarily fearing the success, but you're fearing once you receive that, what's going to happen after? Is it going to continue to go up? And there's anxiety around that 100%. Like that's always, not to mention being a provider. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking I build all this. I quit my 9 to 5. My wife quits her 9 to 5. We all of a sudden kids. If I don't do it, if I don't make it, what happens after that? That's a very scary, real thought for me. So it's very powerful you say that. And the second thing to that is recently I'm in a big group of entrepreneurs. There's like 8 of us all doing very, very well in our respective fields. And we have a guy that was doing, 70,000 a month. And another guy was doing like 75 million a year. And they all had very similar thoughts. And you would think somebody that makes 75 million a year, which is just ungodly, that person wouldn't have any fear. They would be walking on water and feeling amazing. But these fears don't always change as you get more money. In fact, they might even intensify.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the root. Do you see the root? You just gave the example of the root of the money actually doesn't matter. The root and what's firing is what matters. So whatever the root is, that's what they're going back to. And that's why the 75 million a year doesn't feel safe, right? It could be I am unsafe negative cognition. And sometimes when people are in this too, what they do is they look for like confirmation, right? So, oh yeah, so-and-so down the street, remember they were millionaires and they had it on, then they lost it, right? So then they start to do that. So they'll look, they'll confirm their own biases and thoughts sometimes too.
It's crazy because like, obviously we're nowhere near 75 million a year. That's just out of this world. But like, I could totally see myself if I wasn't self-aware of it right now to be exactly that person, because what we have now is more than enough by a long shot, and we don't need more money, quote unquote. But like, that's something I come to terms with quite a bit and really address myself. And like, if I continue down this path and think the way I'm thinking and don't change the way I'm thinking, I'm going to be that person in the future. I don't want to be that person in the future. So I work on myself every single day because of that specific example right there.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point, the differences in your group. So I always tell people, doesn't matter if I worked with someone sometimes poor or lacked money, and then I work with someone who was wealthy and handed things. Sometimes they both have the same I'm unworthy. So I felt unworthy because I couldn't get anything, blah, 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 right, in their history of the memories that I asked. And then one time I was like, oh my goodness, it like was an aha moment for me. The person was like, well, I just was spoiled. And I said, well, okay, if you're spoiled, then you're what? And they said, well, then I'm a brat. And then I'm like, if you're a brat, you're what? He's like, well, I didn't earn anything, therefore I'm unworthy of it. And I was like, it doesn't matter. You could be spoiled, rich, wealthy, and still have the I'm unworthy because I feel I didn't earn it, or I'm unworthy because I couldn't get anything because I didn't have money. Two totally different upbringings. We're not technically all that different, right? We're all firing from these negative cognitions, and however we got there might look a little different, but it's the same thing firing.
That's a very good point you make, and kind of wrap it up here is like, we're all the same. We're all human. Nobody's better than another person. We have our pros and cons of each, advantages, disadvantages, but we're all the same. And that's what I want people to take away from this episode in particular, but just in general, when you're listening to the content and seeing my content, is if you're out there thinking, I don't think I can do this, or I'm not smart enough, or you don't even realize your negative cognitions are firing. Just understand, and I don't know how else to put this, that you can, and there is potential. You just have to come to terms that you're able to do it. So Heather, thank you for coming on. Is there any last words that you would tell somebody based on today's, conversation, or just in general, good last words for us to end on?
I just think be honest with yourself, be honest with what comes up and who you are. And if there's something you need to shift, I wholeheartedly believe that people have the ability to change anything if they truly want to from whatever situation they're in.
And how can people get in contact with you if they want to work with you one-on-one?
I have a website. They can go to www.heatherbrito, it's brito.com. And everything
And those will be in the show notes so you guys can get it. But Heather, thank you for everything.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
You've been listening to Money on My Mind with your host, Brennan Schlagbaum. If you found value in today's discussion, share it with someone who could benefit from it too. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, so you never miss a money mastery tip. Until next time, stay passionate about your financial journey and keep taking bold steps towards your money goals.